Hi guys, tonight, the fire in the hearth is beginning to settle now, the logs turning into a soft, glowing orange that pulses with a slow, rhythmic heat. Outside, the world has grown quiet, wrapped in the velvet embrace of a rural night. The modern sounds of the street, the distant hum of engines, and the persistent glow of screens have all faded away, replaced by the gentle rustle of a wind that feels much older, a wind that has traveled across centuries, carrying the whispers of those who lived long before us. Tonight, we are journeying back in time, drifting away from the frantic pace of the present, into a world where the hours are measured not by the ticking of a clock, but by the shifting of shadows, the settling of the dew, and the slow turning of the great wheel of the seasons. We are going to a small, nameless village, nestled in a lush, green valley, in the heart of the Middle Ages. It is a place where the air is thick and rich, smelling of damp earth, seasoned wood smoke, and the sweet, warm breath of livestock resting in their stalls. Imagine yourself there now. You are wrapped in a heavy, hand-woven wool blanket, the fibers coarse against your skin, but providing a deep, grounding warmth. You are sitting on a sturdy wooden bench, feeling the natural grain of the timber beneath your palms. The only light comes from the dying embers of the communal fire and a single tallow candle, casting long dancing shadows against the walls of wattle and daub. The world feels small, intimate, and infinitely slow. Part 1. The rhythm of the fields, and the language of glances. Life in this medieval village follows the deep, unhurried breath of the earth itself. There is no concept of a weekend or a holiday in the modern sense. There is only the cycle of the sun and the sacred, mandatory pause of the Sabbath. In the spring, the world smells of turned soil, sharp rain, and the promise of life. In the summer, the heat hangs like a heavy golden curtain over the fields, smelling of ripening grain, sun-baked stone, and wild chamomile. For a young man or woman born into a peasant family, work is not just a chore, it is the very fabric of existence. It is a shared burden, a communal dance that binds every soul in the village together. From the moment the first gray light of dawn touches the thatched roofs, and the rooster's cry cuts through the morning mist, every pair of hands is needed. Imagine the sheer physical scale of this life. There are no machines to drown out the sounds of human effort. Instead, the landscape is filled with the rhythmic, hypnotic swish of scythes through tall grass, the low, steady lowing of oxen, and the melodic, high-pitched chatter of women as they weed the long, straight furrows of the Lord's domain. It is a world of constant, unavoidable presence. You are never truly alone. Your neighbors are your co-workers, your protectors, and your witnesses. And yet, it is precisely within this crowded, busy life that the first delicate sparks of attraction begin to flicker, hidden in plain sight. Think of a young woman named Ilara. She has spent her entire morning in the communal gardens, her fingers stained a dark, earthy green by the damp soil and the juices of wild herbs, like tansy and feverfew. Now, in the golden height of the hay harvest, she is working alongside the other women of her kinship group. Her back aches with a dull, steady throb from hours of rhythmic bending, and her linen shift is damp with sweat, clinging to her skin in the humid afternoon air. The scent of the fields is overwhelming your thick, sweet mixture of dying grass, crushed purple clover, and the honest saltiness of human toil. She moves with a grace born of necessity, her body attuned to the demands of the land. Across the expanse of the meadow, separated by several narrow strips of land belonging to different families, is Thomas. He is a young man from the neighboring cluster of cottages, someone Ilara has known since they were children playing in the mud of the village track. But this year, something is different. Thomas is working with a heavy wooden rake, his movements synchronized perfectly with the men around him. To a modern observer, they are just laborers in a field. But to Ilara, every tilt of Thomas's head, the way he pauses to wipe the grit from his brow, or the strength in his forearms as he tumbles the hay, is a silent message. In this world, there are no private letters, no secluded corners to meet for a quiet conversation, and no way to send a secret message that won't be intercepted by a dozen pairs of curious eyes and ears. Courtship is a public performance, played out in the smallest, most microscopic of gestures. A relationship here doesn't start with a formal introduction or a hello. It starts with a glance that lingers just a heartbeat too long over the top of a shared water jug. It starts with the way Thomas chooses to sharpen his scythe with a whetstone, just as Ilara walks past on her way to the communal well, the rhythmic shring of the stone, acting as a wordless call for her attention, a way of saying, I am here, and I see you. The social rules of the village are the invisible fences that keep life orderly. They are as solid and unyielding as the ancient, gnarled oak tree that stands in the center of the village green. A young woman's reputation is her only true dowry, her currency in the marriage market, and her protection against the hardships of the world. It is guarded with a fierce, almost territorial intensity by her mother, her older sisters, and the sharp-eyed widows who spend their afternoons on doorsteps. Their wooden spindles worry like watchful insects. To be seen whispering alone with a man in the long shadows of a barn would be a scandal of immense proportions, a stain that could ruin a family's standing for a generation. Privacy, as we understand it, simply does not exist. Every sigh is heard through the thin lath walls of the cottages. Every late-night walk to the stream is noted and catalogued by a neighbor tending to a restless animal. And yet, despite these walls of tradition and the punishing, endless cycle of labor, the human heart finds its own secret language. The first date for Ilara and Thomas is a masterpiece of medieval subtlety. It takes place during the Sunday procession after the morning mass. Inside the small stone church, the air is still heavy with the scent of beeswax candles, the metallic tang of the incense, and the dampness of 100 wool cloaks. When the service ends, the village spills out into the bright churchyard, and for a few brief hours, the world of work is forgotten. This is the one time in the week when the grime of the earth is painstakingly washed away. Ilara has used a small piece of precious, harsh lye soap to scrub her hands until they are red and clean. Her hair, usually tucked away under a practical linen cap, has been braided with agonizing care, perhaps featuring a single faded ribbon of blue silk, a family heirloom that catches the midday sun. Thomas, too, has undergone a transformation. His tunic is fresh, smelling faintly of the dried lavender and rosemary his mother keeps in their storage chest to ward off the moths. He stands a little taller, his hair dampened down with water, as the congregation moves in a slow, meandering line toward the village green. Thomas maneuvers himself through the crowd with practiced ease. He doesn't dare walk beside Elarat. That would be a declaration of intent far too bold for this stage of their acquaintance. Instead, he positions himself exactly 5 paces behind her, keeping perfect time with her stride. He begins to talk loudly to his cousin about the quality of the timber he has been hewing for the new barn, or the impressive weight of the pig his father plans to slaughter in the autumn. He isn't just talking, he is performing. He is making sure his voice sounds deep, steady, and capable. He is broadcasting his worth as a provider, his physical strength, and his reliability as a man who can sustain a household of his own. For her part, plays her role in this silent, social theater with equal skill. She never turns around to look at him. To do so would be considered unmaidenly and forward. Instead, she inclines her head just a fraction of an inch to the side, a tiny movement that signals she is listening, that his words are reaching her. She laughs at a comment made by her younger sister, a bright, clear, musical sound that cuts through the low murmur of the village folk, intended specifically for Thomas to catch. It is a high-stakes game of proximity and sound. They are communicating through the very air between them, building a bridge of shared intent without ever touching a hand or speaking a direct word of affection. The sounds of this moment are soft, muffled, and timeless. The distant, rhythmic tolling of the church bell, the scuff of heavy leather shoes on the packed dirt path, the rustle of the wind through the lime trees that bordered the cemetery. There is no rush to reach a conclusion. In the medieval mind, time is vast and circular. A marriage is not just a union of two young people in love. It is a legal treaty between two families, a merger of land and livestock, and a commitment to the entire village's collective survival. Therefore, the looking, the noticing, and the silent walking must go on for many months, like a seed sitting deep in the cold, dark earth of winter, waiting for the precisely right moment of warmth and social approval to finally break the surface. As the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, painting the thatched roofs in long, sweeping strokes of copper, amber, and plum, the brief social window of the Sabbath begins to close. The families start to peel away, returning to their respective firesides for their evening meal of dark bread and pottage. Thomas and Alara return to their separate lives, yet the world feels fundamentally different than it did at dawn. The castle has settled into that deep, heavy stillness that only ancient stone can hold. The hustle of the great hall, with its clashing plates and booming laughter, has faded into a distant memory, and the torches in the long, vaulted corridors have been dimmed to a low, amber flicker that casts swaying shadows against the damp granite. If you listen closely, you can hear the faint, mournful whistle of the wind as it tests the iron-barred windows of the high towers. A cold visitor from the moors, seeking a way into the warmth. You are tucked away in a chamber draped in heavy, storied tapestries that muffle the world outside, creating a cocoon of silence. The air here is thick with the scent of old parchment, cedarwood, and the lingering, powdery sweetness of the lavender sachet tucked beneath your pillow to invite peaceful dreams. We are moving deeper into the shadows of the court, past the public ceremonies and the clashing of shields, into the private corners where the heart truly breathes, away from the prying eyes of the chancellors and the kings, while the public life of a noble is a series of rehearsed moves. Grand play, where every bow and curtsy is measured there. Private life is a complex, invisible web of whispered confidences and hidden intentions. In the days following the formal betrothal of Isabeau and Alaric, the castle transforms. It is no longer just a fortress. It becomes a labyrinth of hidden meanings, where a cough, a dropped handkerchief, or the choice of a song can signal a shift in the political and emotional landscape. For Isabeau and Alaric, the path to truly knowing one another cannot be found in open, honest conversation. In the medieval court, honesty is a dangerous luxury. They are constantly surrounded by guards whose armor clinks with every breath, by chaplains who see the soul as a battlefield, and by the ever-present ladies-in-waiting who are often as much spies as they are companions. To speak of one's true fears or burgeoning feelings in the hallway would be to invite the walls themselves to listen and report back to those who stand to gain from their weakness. Instead, their relationship begins to bloom through the silent, intimate medium of the written word. Imagine Isabeau in her solar as the sun begins its slow descent, casting long slanted beams of dusty gold across the floor rushes. Her ladies have moved to the far end of the room, near the hearth, their voices a low, rhythmic hum like the buzzing of bees as they work on their spinning wheels and embroidery frames. This is her precious, stolen time. She sits in the window nook, her fingers trembling slightly as she holds a small piece of vellum, so thin and translucent it feels like the dried skin of a summer fruit. In this world, a letter is not merely a message. It is a sacred, physical piece of the person who sent it. It is traveled in a leather pouch, pressed against a messenger's heart, through rain and forest. It carries the faint, lingering scent of Alaric's private chamber, mix of beeswax and sharp ink-hand. The weight of his hand is felt in the pressure of the quill. Alaric has sent her a poem, copied in a careful, scholarly script that speaks of long hours spent with tutors. It isn't a declaration of burning, reckless passion. That would be a grave breach of etiquette, perhaps even seen as a sign of an unstable character. Instead, it is a meditation on the loyalty of the hunting hawk or the steadfastness of the ancient mountain. This is a code, a sophisticated language of symbols. He is telling her, through the metaphors of the natural world, that he intends to be a man of his word, a husband, who will be as reliable as the stone of the keep. The act of sending and receiving these letters is a delicate, high-stakes operation. It requires a confidant, perhaps a young page, who remembers a kindness Isabeau once showed him, or a loyal lady-in-waiting who values love over politics. This person must slip the folded parchment into a sewing basket among the colorful silks, or hide it beneath a silver tray of winter pears. Every time Isabeau breaks the wax seal, her heart beats with a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The sharp crack of the dried red wax is the sound of a secret being opened, a tiny rebellion against the world of arranged contracts. She reads his words by the flickering light of a single tallow candle as the room grows dark, tracing the elegant curves of the letters with her fingertip, trying to imagine the warmth of his breath and the exact sound of his voice speaking these hidden thoughts. This is the true courtship of the nobility, the intellectual and emotional intimacy built in the silent spaces where the law of the land cannot reach. They are creating a world of two, a sanctuary made of ink, metaphor, and imagination, while the world outside prepares for the grand, cold spectacle of their political union. But there is also the shadow of what might have been, a quiet melancholy that haunts the castle's tapestried halls in the deep, lonely hours of the night. Isabeau sometimes thinks of the stories the traveling minstrels sing in the courtyard, the tragic, sweeping tales of Tristan and Iseud, or the forbidden longing of Lancelot and Guinevere. These are stories of fine amour, of hearts that refuse to follow the rigid lines drawn by kings and bishops. Within the castle walls, there are always those who look at each other with a desperate longing that can never be satisfied in the light of day. Perhaps a young squire looks at a princess with a devotion that borders on worship, or a seasoned knight stares a moment too long at the lady of the house as she crosses the dais. This forbidden love is like a slow-burning ember hidden beneath the floorboards. It doesn't flare into a fire, but it provides a constant, aching warmth. It shows itself in the smallest details, in the way a knight chooses a specific lady to wear his favor during a tournament. He might wear a small silk scarf, stained with her favorite perfume, tied tightly around his arm as he charges down the tilt-yard. He may never speak a single word of love to her, and she may never acknowledge his presence with more than a nod. But that scrap of silk fluttering in the wind is a scream of total devotion in a world of enforced silence. Isabeau watches these silent dramas from the safety of her high stone window. She sees the quiet exchanges in the courtyard below, a lingering hand on a horse's velvet bridle, a dropped leather glove that is returned with a look of such profound sorrow it stays with her for days. She realizes that her own path, though arranged by the cold hands of patriarchs, carries a strange and precious kind of safety. By learning to love Alaric through his carefully chosen words and his steady, respectful glances across the dining hall, she is building a fortress around her own heart, protecting it from the chaotic storms of passion that destroy the heroes in the minstrel songs. The seasons begin to turn with a heavy, inevitable grace. The deep, suffocating snows of winter finally begin to melt, turning into the muddy, hopeful tracks of a burgeoning spring. The very smell of the castle changes. The heavy, choking scent of wood smoke and damp wool is slowly replaced by the fragile, green fragrance of blossoming apple trees and the first violets in the castle orchard. As the wedding day approaches, the letters between Isabeau and Alaric grow longer and more honest. They begin to share their deepest fears, the crushing weight of the responsibilities they will soon inherit, the fear of failing the ancestors whose portraits line the gallery, and the quiet, flickering hope that they might find a genuine, lasting companionship in the long years to come. One afternoon, They are granted a rare and precious moment of private walking in the castle's walled garden, a place of clipped hedges and stone benches. They are not alone, of course. The social rules are never entirely suspended. Her ladies and his knights stand 20 paces behind them, a colorful but distant wall of chaperones. However, the rustle of the new leaves and the splashing of the central fountain provide a veil of sound, a tiny island of privacy in a sea of observation. For the first time, they speak. They do not speak of border disputes, and they do not speak of titles or gold. The primroses are early this year, Isabeau says, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes focused on the tiny yellow flowers peeking through the thawing soil. They are, Alaric replies, his voice low and steady, his eyes fixed on the gravel path ahead of them. They are hardy things, my lady. They find the strength to bloom even when the ground is still cold and the world is not yet ready for them. It is a simple, unremarkable exchange to any passer-by, but to the two of them, it means everything. They are not talking about flowers. They are talking about themselves. They are talking about their shared ability to thrive and find beauty in a world that can be cold, demanding, and indifferent to their individual desires. As they walk together, the heavy hem of her silk gown brushes against the new grass with a sound like a soft, satisfied sigh. The world feels suspended in this moment of budding transition, a bridge between the children they were and the rulers they must become. The fire has burned down to a deep, rhythmic pulse of embers, glowing like a dragon's breath in the dark heart of the hearth. The shadows in the corners of the room have grown long and incredibly soft, stretching across the floorboards like the lingering memories of a long-forgotten age. Outside, the night is perfectly still, the kind of silence that only comes when the world is tucked beneath a thick blanket of frost. The air in here is heavy with the scent of seasoned pine and the faint earthy musk of a world that sleeps in cycles. Tonight, we are leaving the high, crowded courts and the sun-drenched village greens behind to follow the solitary, echoing path of the medieval night. It is a journey defined by the rhythmic, hypnotic clop of hooves on ancient stone, the persistent, cold weight of steel against the skin, and the quiet, aching devotion of a heart left behind in a distant, windswept tower. Imagine yourself now, not in a grand hall, but in a small, circular room at the very top of a lonely watchtower. The walls are thick, rough-hewn stone, holding the chill of the mountain air, but the bed is piled high with heavy furs and hand-loomed woolen blankets that smell of cedar and history. A single tallow candle flickers on a rough oak table, its flame dancing in the draught and reflecting off the curved surface of a polished helmet. The helmet sits there like a silent, eyeless sentry in the corner, a reminder of the world of iron outside. This is a world of immense, daunting distances and long, heavy silences, a world where love is not a daily conversation, but a sacred, private flame kept alive through months, and sometimes years, of brutal separation. To be a knight is to live a life of constant, grinding paradox. On the outside, there is the armor, a complex suit of cold, interlocking plates, leather straps, and chainmail designed to turn away the harshness of the world and transform a vulnerable man into a fortress of iron. But beneath that protective shell of steel beats a heart that has been meticulously trained in the delicate, almost spiritual arts of Fenimore, or courtly love. For a knight, love is not a comfort or a soft place to land. It is a discipline of the soul. It is a profound devotion that must be carried across treacherous mountain passes, through rain-swept, endless forests, and into the terrifying, lonely silence of the Long March. Imagine a knight named Sir Julian. He sits tonight by a small, crackling campfire on the edge of a dark, whispering forest. Hundreds of miles from the stone hearth he calls home. The air is sharp, carrying the scent of wet earth, pine needles, and the metallic familiar temps of his horse's bit as the great animal grazes nearby in the shadows. Julian is engaged in the nightly ritual of maintenance, polishing his steel greaves with a piece of oiled leather. The rhythmic shush of the cloth against the metal is the only sound in the stillness, a hypnotic melody that lulls the senses. But as his hands work the steel to a mirror finish, his mind is not on the coming tournament or the strategic maps of the borderlands. Tucked securely beneath his thick quilted gambeson, pressed directly against his skin, where the warmth of his body is greatest, is a small, frayed scrap of faded crimson silk. It is a favor, a ribbon given to him by a lady whose name he rarely speaks aloud, even to his closest companions. In the medieval world of chivalry, this ribbon is not a mere trinket or a sentimental toy. It is a tether. It is a physical, tangible anchor that connects his spirit to a specific hearth fire, a specific arched window, and a specific promise made under the shade of an orchard. To him, that silk carries more weight than the 60 pounds of armor he wears into battle. The romantic life of a knight is fundamentally defined by this vast, stretching distance. Unlike the peasant, who might catch a glimpse of his beloved at the well every morning, or the noble who passes his betrothed in the gallery during the evening meal, the knight lives in a world of mental imagery and spiritual reconstruction. He must build a cathedral of memory within his own mind, brick by brick, reconstructed from the lingering scent of a crushed wildflower, the ghost of a voice heard 6 months ago, or the way the flickering torchlight once caught a stray strand of golden brown hair as she turned to say goodbye. This distance creates a unique, elevated kind of devotion, one that is slow, agonizingly patient, and deeply internal. Because Julian cannot see his lady's face or hear her laughter, he must serve her through his conduct in the world. In the code of the knight, every act of courage on the field, every moment of mercy shown to a defeated foe, and every long night of endurance in the freezing rain is seen as a private offering to the love he carries. It is a love that does not just survive on absence, it thrives on it. The medieval knight does not date in the sense of spending time together. He aspires to be worthy of the person he left behind. He hones his character as if he were honing the fine edge of his sword, believing with a quiet, steady intensity that by becoming a more honorable man, he is strengthening the invisible bond that spans the miles. Think of the sensory textures of this longing. It is the biting cold of the iron rings of his hauberk as he pulls it over his head in the gray pre-dawn mist, a sensation that immediately brings to mind the contrast of a sun-drenched garden and the warmth of a gentle hand. It is the heavy, pervasive smell of oil, leather, and horse sweat that defines his waking hours, a scent that makes him yearn for the fragrance of dried rose petals and the clean, sweet smell of expensive beeswax candles. The world of the night is a world of harsh, unforgiving textures, cold stone, splintered wood, rusted iron, and thick, clinging medan. This harshness makes the mental image of his lady's softness feel like a divine miracle. In the quiet, lonely hours before sleep finally takes him, when the campfire has died down to a few glowing teeth in the darkness, Julian does not have the luxury of pulling a letter from his pocket or looking at a likeness. Instead, he engages in a sacred ritual of contemplation. He reconstructs their final parting on the castle ramparts. He remembers the exact shade of the morning sky, a pale, watery blue that seemed to promise both hope and sorrow. He remembers the way the wind caught the edge of her silk veil, and the precise moment her hand slipped from his as he turned to mount his horse. He plays this scene over and over in the quiet theater of his mind, like a monk reciting a well-worn prayer, ensuring that not a single heartbeat or a single shadow is lost to the eroding passage of time. This is the emotional restraint that defines his life. There is no room in the life of a knight for the frantic, messy, and loud outbursts of modern romance. Their love is a slow-burning fire, carefully shielded from the wind by the heavy cloak of duty. It is a commitment to a person who has, through distance, become a guiding star, Stella Maris, in the darkness of a violent and unpredictable world. The separation is not seen as an obstacle to be overcome. It is the very crucible that proves the strength of the metal. To love across such a gulf of time and space, through such an oppressive silence, requires a soul that has been tempered like the finest steel. As Julian finally lies back, his head resting on the hard leather of his saddle, and his cloak pulled tight against the creeping frost, the sounds of the night forest surround him. He hears the distant, lonely hoot of an owl, the soft rustle of small creatures moving through the undergrowth, and the steady, rhythmic breathing of his destrier tied nearby. He is a man of war, a man of iron and blood. But as he closes his eyes and feels the small silk ribbon against his chest, he is simply a man who is very far from home. The castle where she waits is a world away, separated by rivers, mountains, and months of travel, but in the soft, flickering light of his memory, he is already walking through the gates, feeling the cold stone give way to the warmth of the hearth. The fire has now settled into a deep, slumbering glow, casting a soft amber light that feels as warm and ancient as the stories themselves. In the quiet corners of the castle, the air is perfectly still, smelling faintly of dried lavender and the sweet, lingering scent of burnt cedar. We have moved beyond the cold steel of the night and the political weight of the noble halls. We are entering the very heart of the medieval dream, the world of courtly love. This is a place where love is not a contract or a physical touch, but a beautiful, unreachable star. A melody played on a lute in a moonlit courtyard, a poem whispered to the shadows. Imagine yourself resting on a window seat carved into the thick stone of a tower. Outside, the world is a sea of silver moonlight, and inside, the only sound is the rhythmic, gentle scratching of a quill on parchment. This is the realm of the troubadours, where the greatest distance isn't measured in miles, but in the exquisite, sacred space between the heart and its desire. Part 4. The Song of the Lute and the Idealized Flame in the high courts of the 12th and 13th centuries. A new kind of magic was born, a way of loving that was more like a religion than a romance. It was called Finamore, the refined love. To the men and women of this time, the most beautiful form of love was one that could never be fully possessed or brought down to the mundane reality of daily life. It was a love built on the foundation of intense longing, on the sweet, deliberate ache of waiting, and on the quiet, unshakable belief that the person you loved was a living mirror of everything divine, perfect, and celestial in the world. This was not a love for the weak of heart. It was a path of spiritual transformation, where the lover sought to better themselves simply to be worthy of breathing the same air as their beloved. Think of a young poet, a troubadour who has traveled from the warm, sun-soaked hills of the south where the air smells of wild thyme, lemon trees, and salt, to this great stone fortress in the cold north. He sits in the long velvet shadows of the great hall, his fingers ghosting over the delicate gut strings of his lute, with a reverence usually reserved for prayer. The room is filled with the low, indistinct murmur of the court, the clatter of silver on oak, the shuffling of feet in the rushes, but, as he begins to play, a profound heavy hush falls over the assembly. The music is slow, haunting, and repetitive, a series of minor chords that seem to vibrate in the very marrow of the bones, calling for a stillness of the spirit. He is not singing for the crowd or for the favor of the Lord. He is singing for one person alone, a lady who sits on the high dais, her face a pale serene oval in the golden flicker of the candlelight, her eyes fixed on a point far beyond the castle walls. In this world of courtly love, the lady is the suzerain, the absolute sovereign of the poet's heart. He is her humble servant, her vassal, bound to her by an invisible oath of fealty that no sword can break. This is not an equal partnership, as we think of it today. It is a ladder of the soul, a spiritual hierarchy where the beloved sits at the very top. The poet believes with every fiber of his being that by loving someone so noble, so beautiful, and so impossibly far above his station, his own spirit is being scrubbed clean of its rough, worldly edges. He finds himself becoming more eloquent in his speech, more patient in his suffering, and more virtuous in his secret deeds, simply because he dares to fix his gaze upon her perfection. It is a love that asks for nothing and gives everything, finding its reward in the mere existence of the other. This love is defined, above all, by its distance. It is an idealized flame that burns brightest when it is not touched, kept pure by the very fact that it remains unfulfilled. Imagine the sensory intensity of this longing the way the troubadour watches from across the vast room as the heavy embroidered hem of her silk sleeve brushes against the dark oak of the table, or the way he memorizes the specific, quiet rhythm of her breath as she listens to his song. He does not seek to hold her hand, nor does he dream of whispering in her ear. He seeks only to be worthy of a single, fleeting smile or a nod of recognition. He captures her essence in a poem, comparing her eyes to the first, trembling light of a spring dawn, and her voice to the sound of a distant, hidden stream in a forest of silver birch. To him, she is not just a woman made of flesh and bone. She is a cathedral of grace, an earthly vessel for a heavenly light. This poetry is the very heartbeat of the courtly world. It is written on the finest, cream-colored vellum, decorated with painstaking gold leaf and vibrant blues made from crushed lapis lazuli brought from the distant east. The words are chosen with the same agonizing, slow precision a jeweler uses to set a rare diamond into a crown. Every stanza is a brick in a monumental cathedral of words, built to house a feeling that is too large for the human chest. When the poet writes, he is not just expressing a fleeting feeling or a passing whim. He is practicing a high and difficult craft, what they called the gay science. He speaks often of the joy of love, but it is a strange, bittersweet joy that comes entirely from the act of loving itself, thriving in the space between the lover and the beloved, regardless of whether that love is ever acknowledged, returned, or even noticed. The sounds of this world are delicate, intentional, and remarkably slow. It is the soft pluck of a string, the dry rustle of a heavy page being turned in a quiet solar, and the hushed, melodic whispers of lovers in the walled orchard who speak only of the philosophy of the soul and the nature of beauty. There is a deep, meditative slowness to this entire tradition. A single glance shared between the courses of a grand meal might be discussed, analyzed, and obsessed over by the poet for weeks on end. Was her look one of soft pity? Was it one of sudden, startling recognition? Did she turn her head away because she was cold, or because she felt the same terrifying, wonderful tremor of emotion that he did? In this world, the smallest gesture is a language unto itself, more profound than 1,000 spoken words. In the medieval mind, this kind of love was a way to transcend the brutal, gray harshness of daily life. The world outside the castle walls was a place of winter hunger, of mud, of sickness, and of the cold, hard reality of survival. It was a world of mud-spattered boots and iron swords. But inside the poem, inside the song, everything was made eternal and pristine. The lady never aged, her beauty never faded into the autumn of life, and the love never grew tired, mundane, or bitter. It was a sanctuary of the mind, a sacred, quiet place where the human heart could reach for something higher and more lasting than the earth beneath its feet. It was a dream of perfection in a world that was often broken. As the troubadour finally finishes his song, the final vibrating note lingers in the high, darkened rafters of the great hall, fading so slowly that it is hard to tell when it truly ends and the velvet silence begins. The lady on the dais does not speak a word. She simply lowers her eyes for a heartbeat, a gesture of quiet, profound acknowledgement that ripples through the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. To the rest of the court, it is merely a polite moment of evening entertainment, but to the poet, it is the absolute, unmoving center of his universe. He will take that silence and that downward cast of her dark lashes, and he will carry them back to his small, cold room in the high tower. He will light a single, flickering candle, dip his quill into the dark, obsidian ink, and begin to write another 10,000 words, all dedicated to the way a single shadow fell across her cheek in the candlelight. This is the infinite, holy patience of courtly love, a love that can live on the smallest, most invisible crumbs and find a magnificent royal feast in a single gesture. It is a slow, steady pulse, like the ticking of a celestial clock made of golden glass, reminding us that the most powerful and transformative things in life are often the ones we cannot touch with our hands, but can only feel in the deepest, quietest, and most secret spaces of our being. The world outside the stone walls may change, empires may rise and crumble into dust, but the song of the heart remains, echoing forever through the silent halls of memory. The fire has burned down now to a soft, glowing hum, the deep orange light washing over the room like a slow-moving benediction. The air is cool, yet the hearth provides a steady, rhythmic warmth that feels like the very breath of the old stone walls. We are moving away from the sun-drenched gardens of the poets and the steel-clashed fields of the knights. Tonight, we are stepping into the quiet, echoing sanctity of the medieval church, a place where the scent of cold stone, beeswax, and ancient incense hangs heavy and timeless in the air, and where the matters of the human heart were weighed against the immense, star-filled vastness of eternity. Imagine yourself kneeling on a smooth, worn wooden bench in a small village chapel, the wood polished by centuries of hands and knees. The light filters through the stained glass in dusty, leaning beams of sapphire and ruby, dancing slowly across the floor rushes. In this world, the church was not just a building, it was the invisible map of the human soul. Every heartbeat, every secret desire, and every whispered promise was seen through the lens of a higher morality. It was a world of profound, deliberate restraint, where the journey toward love was paved with quiet prayers and the heavy, solemn beauty of sacred rituals that had remained unchanged for generations. For the medieval person, love was never a solitary or lawless path. It was a journey taken under the watchful, yet often fatherly and protective eye of the church. The priest was more than a distant figure of authority. He was the keeper of the community's secrets, the one who heard the whispered, frantic confessions of a young man who had looked too long and too longingly at a girl in the market, or a woman whose heart had begun to stray from the path chosen for her by her kin. In this world, every romantic impulse, every flutter of the pulse, was considered a spiritual event of the highest order. There was a deep, meditative slowness to the way the church shaped relationships, turning the frantic, chaotic energy of youth into the steady, purposeful architecture of a lifelong union. Imagine a young couple, Peter and Catherine, standing at the threshold of the church on their wedding morn. In the early Middle Ages, weddings did not often begin inside the sanctuary. They happened outside, at the very doors of the church. This was profoundly symbolic. The church door was the bridge, the liminal space between the messy, secular world of the village and the divine, ordered space of the spirit. As they stand there, the cool morning air is filled with the crisp scent of the nearby pine forest and the metallic, rhythmic clink-clop of the church bell, calling the faithful. Peter is dressed in his best linen, his heart thumping like a muffled drum against his ribs. Catherine stands beside him, her head bowed in a gesture of humility that the church prized above all else, her fingers nervously twisting a small piece of blue wool. The role of the church in their romance began long before this day, in the quiet, shadowed corners of the confessional. Imagine Peter, kneeling in the dark, speaking through a carved wooden screen to the village priest. He speaks of temptation, not in a way that is harsh or academic, but in a way that is raw and deeply human. He speaks of the struggle to keep his thoughts pure when he sees Catherine at the well, the struggle to wait for the proper season, and the weight of the social rules that demand his absolute restraint. The priest responds not with a cold lecture, but with a quiet, melodic series of prayers and advice. This was the medieval way of managing the human heart, by teaching it that waiting is itself a form of worship, and that restraint is the most powerful way of proving the depth and sincerity of one's devotion. It turned longing into a spiritual exercise. The morality of the church was a heavy, omnipresent cloak, but to many, it was also a profound comfort. It provided a clear, unshakable structure to the often frightening chaos of human emotion. In a world where life was often short, fragile, and unpredictable, the church offered the sacrament of marriage as a fixed point, an unbreakable vow that mirrored the eternal relationship between the divine and the earth. For Catherine and Peter, their love was not just a fleeting, private feeling. It was a public commitment to the stability of their village and the health of their own souls. The church taught them that love was a labor, a quiet, daily service to one another that required the same infinite patience as tilling a stubborn field or weaving a complex tapestry. The sounds of this moral world were the sounds of bells, the rustle of robes, and whispered Latin that drifted like smoke. Imagine the hush that falls over the entire congregation as the priest raises his hand in a final blessing. The ceremony is agonizingly slow, punctuated by long, heavy pauses where the only sound is the occasional crackle of the great beeswax candles and the distant, muffled lowing of cattle in the valley. There is a sense of gravity here that the modern world has largely forgotten. When they exchange their vows, they are not just speaking to each other. They are speaking to the ghosts of their ancestors and the unborn spirits of their children. The words are heavy, ancient, and grounded, designed to anchor them through the storms of sickness, hunger, and toil that will inevitably come. But there was also a profound, quiet emotional conflict within this sacred structure. The church often spoke of the spirit versus the flesh, and for many young lovers, this created a private, internal battlefield. How could one love another human being so completely, so physically, without forgetting to love the divine? This tension created a unique kind of romantic intensity that we rarely see today. Because their physical time together was so strictly regulated, and their every interaction so public, the internal, private life of the couple became a vast, secret garden. Their love grew in the silences, in the shared glances during the long hours of the Eucharist, and in the way they knelt side by side in the damp morning mist of a saint's day. Their restraint made the smallest touch feel like a revelation. The marriage ritual itself was a slow, beautiful piece of choreography. At the climax of the ceremony, the priest would take Peter and Catherine's joined hands and wrap them in his silk stole, a physical representation of the invisible bond that was now being forged in the eyes of the community and the heavens. The smell of the incense would swirl around them in thick white clouds of sweet, earthy fragrance of frankincense and myrrh that seemed to lift their earthly promises up into the darkened, oak-beamed rafters of the ceiling. For Peter and Catherine, this was the moment the very fabric of the world changed. They were no longer two separate individuals wandering the diverging paths of the village. They were a single unit, a new hearth fire lit in the cold, vast darkness of the world. As the ceremony ends, and they finally step out of the shadow of the porch into the bright, clear light of the afternoon, the village erupts in a gentle, festive cheer. But even as they walk toward the wedding feast, the soft influence of the church remains like a shadow. It stays with them in the way they will speak to one another with respect, in the way they will manage their new household with charity, and in the quiet, rhythmic prayers they will say together before they sleep. The church had taught them that love was not a sudden, destructive flash of lightning, but a steady, glowing ember that must be tended with daily care, immense patience, and a deep, abiding respect for the sacredness of the other person. The day fades into a soft, purple twilight, and the village church stands as a silent, stone guardian on the hill, its bells now quiet and its shadows long. Inside, the candles have been snuffed out, leaving only the lingering, comforting scent of warm wax and the cool, peaceful air of the sanctuary. Peter and Catherine are home now, starting their life in the rhythm that the church has set for them, rhythm of work, of prayer, and of a love that understands that the most beautiful and enduring things in life are the ones we hold with reverence, duty, and holy restraint. The fire is now a bed of glowing jewels, pulsating with a soft, steady heat that seems to mirror the quiet rhythm of the night. Outside, the world is draped in a heavy silence, the kind of stillness that only exists when the wind has ceased its play and the earth is tucked beneath the stars. We are leaving the grand cathedrals and the night's encampments behind to enter a much more intimate space. We are moving into the small, sun-dappled rooms in the secret garden paths where the women of the Middle Ages lived, breathed, and navigated the complex, often hidden waters of the heart. Imagine yourself sitting by a heavy oak loom, the wooden frame creaking gently with a familiar, rhythmic groan as you pass the shuttle back and forth. The air in this room smells of raw, oily wool, dried bunches of savory herbs hanging from the rafters, and the faint, sweet scent of climbing roses drifting through the open stone window. This is the world from a woman's perspective, a world where love was not a sudden lightning bolt, but something to be managed, negotiated, or quietly discovered in the tiny, precious spaces between duty, prayer, and expectation. It is a story not of loud proclamations, but of profound emotional strength, of a resilience that bends but never breaks, and of the secret, internal rebellions that allowed the heart to bloom, even in a garden fenced by iron rules. Part 6. The Loom, the Garden, and the Architecture of Silence for a Woman in the Middle Ages. Whether she was a lady of the manor in her silks, or a daughter of the village in her rough spun, Courtship life was defined by a series of expectations that were as rigid and unyielding as the stone walls of a fortress. From the moment she could walk, she was taught that her life was a single thread in a much larger, ancestral tapestry, woven by the hands of her father, her brothers, and eventually the husband chosen for her. In this world, the modern idea of choosing a partner based on a whim or a sudden spark of passion was a luxury she rarely possessed. Her marriage was her career, her physical safety, her social standing, and her sacred contribution to the survival of her bloodline. Imagine a woman named Juliana. She stands at the edge of the village orchard as the sun begins to dip low, casting long golden fingers of light through the heavy branches of the apple trees. To the outside world, she is the image of the perfect, dutiful daughter, a skilled weaver, a quiet presence at Mass, and a woman of serene grace. But inside, beneath the linen of her bodice, her mind is a vast and complex landscape, as deep and mysterious as the forests beyond the fields. She knows that in 3 months' time, she will be wed to a man she has spoken to only twice, and always under the watchful, unblinking eyes of her kin. The weight of this lack of choice is not a loud or violent thing. It is a steady, atmospheric pressure, like the weight of the air before a summer storm. It is the constant understanding that her individual heart is a secondary concern to the needs of the land, the strength of an alliance, or the settling of an old debt. And yet, it is within this very structure of necessity that the medieval woman found her unique, shimmering strength. Juliana does not see herself as a victim of her circumstances. Instead, she approaches her life with a tactical, quiet brilliance. She understands a truth that the poets often forget. While men might control the laws, the titles, and the lands, it is the women who control the atmosphere, the subtle emotions of the hearth, and the hidden, vital rhythms of the household. The dating process for Juliana is not a series of conversations, but a masterclass in observation and silent testing. When she sits at the communal table during a feast, or walks to the market with her basket, she is a scholar of human character. She watches the man she is to marry with the intensity of a hawk. She is not looking to see if he will bring her wildflowers or sing her songs. She is looking to see how he treats his tired oxen, how he speaks to the beggars at the gate, and how he carries his temper when things go wrong. She is searching for the foundations of a life, kindness, reliability, and a hand that is steady rather than heavy. Her romance is built on the profound hope for a companionable peace, which, in her world, is a treasure far more valuable than the fleeting fires of passion. There is a profound, quiet rebellion in the way Juliana maintains her internal life. Imagine her back at her loom, the torchlight flickering against the walls. As the shuttle moves back and forth, clack swish, clack, she is not just weaving wool. She is weaving her own thoughts, her own dreams, and her own identity. In the repetitive hypnotic motion of the work, she finds a private sanctuary, a place where no father, priest, or future husband can dictate her feelings. She remembers a melody a traveler hummed, or she imagines a future where she and her husband might eventually find a genuine, whispered affection in the dark of their own home, long after the candles have been snuffed. This internal world is hers alone, an unassailable fortress of the spirit. The sensory world of the medieval woman is one of immense tactile richness, and she uses it to communicate what she cannot say aloud. It is the feel of raw, unspun flax between the fingers, the smell of woodruff and mint being crushed for the evening pottage, and the silver sound of birdsong at the very first light of dawn. These small, daily beauties are the anchors of her existence. When she walks in the garden, she is gathering more than just food or medicine. She is practicing the language of plants. She knows that a sprig of rosemary left on a certain wooden bench is a signal of remembrance, and that the specific way she ties her headscarf or chooses a colored thread can communicate a mood or a message better than any spoken word could ever hope to do. This is the secret, nonverbal language of medieval women, a subterranean stream of communication that allowed them to support each other and signal to the men they cared for, without ever breaking the rigid social codes that bound them. Think of the immense emotional strength required to step into a new life with a stranger, to leave the safety of one's childhood hearth for a house that is not yet a home. On the day of her betrothal, Juliana wears her finest gown, its heavy fabric and tight laces acting as a kind of ceremonial armor. She stands tall, her face a mask of serene composure and dignity. Her strength is not found in the edge of a sword, but in her capacity to endure, to adapt, and to eventually shape her new environment into a place of warmth and life. She knows that once she crosses that threshold, she will be the one to manage the fire, to heal the sick with her knowledge of herbs, to comfort the grieving, and to be the steady, unmoving heartbeat of the family in the quiet, blue moments of the evening, when the day's labor is finally done and the village begins to settle into sleep. Juliana and the other women often gather by the stream or beneath the sprawling limbs of the great village oak. They speak in low melodic tones, sharing the collective wisdom of 1,000 years. They talk about how to manage a difficult husband with soft words and patience, how to find private joy in the growth of a garden, and how to keep the light of one's spirit alive in a world built on duty. This communal support is the invisible thread that holds the medieval world together. They are the keepers of the oral history of the heart, passing down the secrets of emotional survival and the small, hidden ways to find love, even in a world where love was not the starting point. As the moon rises higher, casting a silver glow over the thatch, Juliana returns to her father's cottage for one of the last times. She lies in the dark, listening to the rhythmic, familiar breathing of her sisters beside her. She feels the heavy, comforting weight of the blankets. She is not afraid of the future, for she knows she comes from a long, unbroken line of women who have turned cold stone houses into warm homes and strangers into lifelong partners. Her love story may not be written in the epic, soaring poems of the knights, but it is written in the steady, enduring fire of the hearth and the magnificent strength of her silence. She knows that love, in its truest and most lasting form, is a slow-growing vine, one that finds its way through the tiniest cracks in the stone, until, years later, it has covered the entire wall in a coat of vibrant, living green. The fire has dwindled now, leaving only the deepest, most patient embers to pulse in the dark, like the steady heartbeat of the house itself. The warmth it gives is low and grounding, much like the lives and values of the men we are about to revisit. Outside, the night air is perfectly still, and the world seems to hold its breath under a blanket of frost. We are turning our gaze toward the men of the Middle Ages, not as the ironclad warriors of legend or the distant, cold lords of high stone towers, but as sons, brothers, and young men trying to find their footing in a world where honor was a heavy, invisible mantle and duty was the very ground upon which they walked. Imagine a quiet, dimly lit room in a timber-framed house. The air smells of sweet beeswax, worked leather, and the lingering, dusty scent of grain brought in from the day's labor. You are resting your head on a pillow of soft, unspun wool, listening to the world slowed down to the pace of a flickering candle. This is the story of the medieval man's heart-to-heart that often beat behind a mask of stoicism and strength, navigating the narrow, treacherous paths between what he privately desired and what his family and faith required of him. For a man in the Middle Ages, the concept of the self, as we know it today, was a foreign idea. A man was inseparable from his lineage, his kin, and his land. He was not merely an individual with personal whims. He was the current bearer of an ancestral name, the temporary protector of a specific plot of earth, and the vital, living link between the ancestors who had cleared the forests and the children who would one day inherit the plow. From the time his hands were strong enough to hold a wooden spade or the hilt of a training sword, he was taught that his primary virtue was not happiness, but reliability. To be a man was to be a pillar, and a pillar does not choose where it stands, where it is needed to hold up the heavy roof of the family's survival. Imagine a young man named Robert. He is sitting on the rough stone wall of his father's sheepfold as the twilight turns the rolling hills into a soft, hazy violet. Robert is a man of few words, his hands calloused and stained by the stone and the alkaline soil, his shoulders broad and slightly sloped from years of carrying the literal and metaphorical weight of his father's expectations. He is at an age where the talk at the evening hearth has turned, with increasing and uncomfortable frequency, toward marriage. But for Robert, and for most men of his station, this is not a conversation about romance or the fluttering of the heart. It is a serious, legal conversation about joining the merging of resources, the securing of borders, and the strengthening of the bloodline. The internal conflict Robert feels is not a loud, dramatic rebellion or a series of angry outbursts. It is a quiet, persistent, and lonely hum of longing. He has seen a girl from the valley below during the market days, someone with a quick, musical laugh and a way of moving through the crowd that makes the heavy air of the village feel lighter. But she comes from a family with little land and too many mouths to feed. Her dowry would be nothing more than her own hard work and a few copper coins. His father, however, has been looking with a keen, calculating eye toward the north, toward a family with a sturdy stone barn, 3 grazing meadows that touch their own, and a daughter whose reputation is as solid as the walls of the church. To Robert, the choice feels like choosing between a beautiful, fading dream and a heavy, lifelong debt. In this world, a man's honor was tied inextricably to his obedience. To go against his father's wishes was not just a personal disagreement. It was seen as a betrayal of the family's collective survival. If the land was not joined, if the alliance was not made, the coming winter might be harder, the king's taxes more difficult to pay, and the family's hard-won standing in the village might slip into the mud. Robert understands this with a solemn maturity that is born of necessity. His courtship is not a pursuit of the heart, but a quiet, internal process of acceptance, a slow, deliberate setting aside of the what-if in favor of the what must be. The pressure on a medieval man was the immense, constant pressure of being the sole provider and the primary protector. He was taught to be a man of stone in public, showing no hesitation, no doubt, and certainly no weakness that a rival might exploit. but in the quiet, dark hours of the night. Lying on his pallet of straw, while the rest of the house slept, Robert navigates a different, more fragile landscape. He thinks about the woman his father has chosen for him, a woman he has perhaps seen from a distance, but whose inner thoughts are a complete mystery to him. He doesn't know the color of her eyes when she's happy, or the specific sound of her voice when she's tired. But he begins to build a different kind of love for her in his mind, love based on shared purpose and mutual respect. He decides, in the sacred silence of his own heart, that he will be a good husband to her. He will be the roof over her head, the wood for her fire, and the wall against the wind. This is his silent, heroic choice, to turn an arranged duty into a lifelong lived devotion. The sensory world of Robert's life is rugged, honest, and grounding. It is the cold, sharp bite of the iron spade hitting the morning frost, the smell of damp wool cloaks drying by the smoky fire, and the rhythmic, hypnotic thump-thump of the flail during the long threshing season. These tasks are his meditation, his way of processing the world. As he works, he moves his emotions through the physical movement of his body. Every heavy stone he moves to mend a crumbling wall is a way of mending his own path, of accepting the boundaries and the geography of his life. He finds a strange, masculine peace in the work. The land does not ask him how he feels or what he desires. It only asks him to be present, to be strong, and to be consistent. When the time for the formal meeting with the other family finally comes, Robert carries himself with a quiet, unshakable dignity. He wears his best tunic, the one his mother spun and dyed for him with care, and he stands tall among the elders. When he finally meets the woman he is to marry, he does not look for a lightning bolt of passion or a Hollywood spark. Instead, he looks for a partner. He watches with a keen eye how she works her needle, how she speaks to her younger siblings with a mixture of firmness and kindness, and how she carries herself with pride among the village folk. He is looking for a woman of honor to match his own, and in that first, brief, and incredibly heavy moment of their eyes finally connecting, there is a wordless agreement. They are both vital parts of a larger ancient machine, two gears, coming together with a click to keep the world turning for another generation. The dating for Robert is the shared, comfortable silence of building a life. It is the first time they walk together to the spring fields to check the sprouts. The way they divide the heavy labor of the kitchen garden, and the quiet, nodding approval they receive from the village elders as they pass. His honor is found in his constancy, his staying power. To love, for Robert, is to show up every single day, to work until his bones ache and his breath is short, and to ensure that his wife and children are fed, warm, and safe from the wolves of the world. It is a love that is proved not in flowery poems or lute songs, but in the steady, reliable supply of seasoned firewood and the meticulously mended thatch of the cottage roof, as the moon climbs higher over the darkened valley, casting a silver ethereal light over the sheepfold and the sleeping fields. Robert finally stands up from the stone wall. He feels the sharp, refreshing coolness of the night air on his face, clearing his mind. The conflict in his heart has not entirely disappeared. Perhaps it never will, but it has transformed. It has become a source of quiet, internal strength. He realizes that by honoring his family and his duty, he is participating in something ancient, grand, and far larger than himself. He is a link in a long, unbreakable chain of men who have sacrificed their individual, fleeting whims for the sake of the collective good and the survival of the village. He walks back toward the small cottage, the familiar, comforting smell of wood smoke guiding him home through the dark. He knows that his life will be hard, his hands will always be calloused, and his days will be long and exhausting. But there is a profound, grounding comfort in knowing exactly where he belongs in the world. He will marry the woman from the north. He will tend those 3 grazing meadows until they flourish, and he will build a life of quiet, unshakable honor. His love story is not one of a sudden, bright spark that burns out in the wind, but of a steady, warming flame that will burn for 40 years, long after the bright stars of his youth have faded into the gray light of the dawn. The fire has now reached its deepest state, a collection of slumbering rubies, buried beneath a delicate shroud of gray ash, casting a glow that barely brushes the dark oak of the floorboards. The air in the room has grown heavy and sweet, smelling of the cooling hearth and the ancient, quiet dust of the rafters that have seen centuries of nights just like this one. As Robert, from our previous chapter, settles into the life of duty and honor expected of him, we turn our quiet gaze to those who lived in the long, flickering shadows of the great social walls, the ones who dared to cross the lines of class, blood, and law for a connection the world whispered could not, and should not, exist. This is the story of the hidden heart, of the word whispered in the dark, and the immense, staggering courage required to love in secret when the world demands absolute transparency. Imagine a world where every movement is watched by 100 eyes, where the very architecture of the village in the high stone castle is designed for observation and communal living. In such a world, the greatest act of rebellion was not a raised sword, but a private, unmonitored conversation in the rigid, unyielding hierarchy of the Middle Ages. Love was often treated as a matter of geography. In ledger books you loved who was within your circle, who lived on your lord's land, or who possessed a rank that mirrored your own. But the human heart has never been particularly good at following the lines drawn on maps or the names written in marriage contracts. There were always those who looked across the jagged stone walls of the castle or the sturdy wooden fences of the village and saw someone who felt like home, despite the world loudly declaring them to be strangers. This was the world of forbidden love, a delicate and terrifyingly dangerous landscape where a single misstep, a single misplaced letter, or a single lingering look could mean the total loss of honor, the exile of a family, or even the loss of life itself. Imagine a woman named Alina. She is a daughter of the village, a woman of needles and silver threads, whose days are spent in the high, drafty solar of the keep, repairing the fine linens and heavy velvets of the nobility. She moves like a shadow through the great halls, her presence necessary, but often unnoticed. And then there is Julian, a young man of noble birth, a knight in training whose future is already mapped out in titles and stone. Their lives should never have touched beyond the professional, cold exchange of a mended cloak or a polite distant nod in the torchlit hallway. But love in the medieval world often began in the eyes long before it ever dared to reach the lips. It began in the way Julian noticed the grace in Elena's hands as she worked, and the way Elena noticed the kindness in Julian's voice when he spoke to the stable hands. For Elena and Julian, their courtship is a masterpiece of invisibility, a silent dance played out in the margins of the day. It exists in the stolen seconds of a shared glance as they pass on the narrow, winding spiral stairs, a look that lasts only a fraction of a heartbeat, longer than a servant should ever dare to hold the gaze of a lord. It is a relationship built entirely on the empty spaces of the castle's rhythm. In a world with no true privacy, they find it in the predictable patterns of the chores. They meet at the blue hour, that time when the hounds are being fed in the kennels and the guards are noisily changing shifts on the ramparts, those blurred, gray moments of transition when the watchful, suspicious eyes of the court are momentarily turned toward their own business. Their meetings take place in the cold, forgotten corners where the light of the torches does not reach, the damp, dark cellar where the winter apples are stored in straw, or the overgrown, wild corner of the orchard where the trees have grown too gnarled and sour to be productive. Imagine the sensory intensity of these brief, stolen moments. The air in the apple cellar is thick and intoxicating, smelling of fermenting fruit, cold earth, and the faint, metallic scent of Julian's armor. Every sound in the silence is a terrifying threat, the dry scuttle of a rat in the rafters, the rhythmic drip of water from a damp stone, the distant, muffled clank of an iron gate. In these deep shadows, they do not speak of the future. for they know the future is a high wall they cannot climb. They speak only of the present, their voices hushed to a low vibration that is more felt against the skin than heard by the ear. The emotional depth of this forbidden love is found in its absolute purity, because there is no hope of a public wedding, no dowry to be haggled over, and no ancestral lands to be joined together. Their connection is stripped of everything but the essence of the person. Julian does not love Alina for her father's sheep or her family's standing, for she has none, and Alina does not love Julian for his family's ancient title or the stone towers he will one day inherit. In the absolute darkness of the apple cellar, they are simply two souls seeking heat and recognition in a cold, meticulously structured universe. This creates a bond of a different, more resilient caliber of devotion that is sharpened and made keen by the constant, breathing presence of fear. Fear, in this hidden world, is not a deterrent. It is a catalyst that makes every whispered word feel like a sacred, priceless relic. The language of their love is one of secret symbols and profound silence. Julian might leave a small, smooth river stone on a specific mossy ledge in the laundry court, a silent sign that he will be waiting when the moon reaches the height of the clock tower. Alina might wear a single thread of a certain vibrant color in her hair or on her sleeve, a coded message that the solar is too crowded for even a glance today. This is the secret life of the medieval world, a subterranean network of meaning that exists forever beneath the official laws of the church and the king. It is a slow, methodical way of loving, where a single, brief touch of the hand must be enough to sustain a hungry heart for an entire month of silence. There is a profound, quiet sorrow in this hidden life, but there is also a magnificent, internal strength. Alina walks through the village and the castle with a secret, warming fire in her chest that no one can see. She bows low to the ladies of the court. She sews their fine silks with a steady hand, and she listens to their endless talk of arranged marriages and political alliances. She feels a strange, quiet pity for them, for while she lives in constant fear of being discovered, she knows a depth of genuine feeling that the official world rarely touches. Her rebellion is not one of fire and swords. It is the quiet rebellion of choosing her own heart in a world that demanded it be given away to the highest bidder. Think of the night they finally decide to risk everything for a single, final hour together before Julian must ride out to the distant, dangerous borders. The moon is nothing more than a thin, silver sliver in the sky, providing just enough light to see the curve of the path, but not enough to reveal the identity of the traveler. They meet by the old moss-covered well, the cold stone pressing against their backs, the smell of the night air, damp grass, cooling stone, and the distant, faint drift of wood smoke is etched forever into their memories as the very scent of their love. They stand in total silence for a long time, simply breathing the same air, their hands joined tightly in the darkness. There are no grand poems, no lute songs, no promises of forever. There is only the heavy, rhythmic thrum of two human hearts, beating together against the vast, indifferent silence of history, as the first, thin gray light of dawn begins to touch the eastern horizon. They part. They do not say goodbye, for in their world, goodbye is a word too final and too heavy to bear. They simply release their hands, the warmth lingering for a second, and vanish into the waking mist of the morning. They return to their separate, divided worlds, one to the embroidery frame and the quiet solar, the other to the heavy leather saddle and the path of war. They will carry this secret like a hidden, precious bruise, something that aches when the wind blows cold from the north, but also something that reminds them, with every beat of their pulse, that they are truly alive. Their love story will never be recorded in the gilded family genealogies or the dusty parish registers, but it is written forever in the very stones of the castle and the ancient roots of the orchard. The fire in the hearth is now nothing but a memory of heat, a soft, silent bed of gray ash. The world is fast asleep, and the stories of the knights, the peasants, the nobles, and the secret, Brave lovers are all tucked away in the long velvet shadows of time. We realize, as we drift off, that the human heart, in any age and under any law, is a resilient and beautiful thing capable of finding its own light in the darkest of cellars and making a home in the most forbidden of places. The fire has now reached its deepest, most secret static collection of slumbering rubies buried beneath a delicate silver shroud of gray ash, casting a glow that barely brushes the dark oak of the floorboards or the heavy, draped tapestries. The air in the room has grown thick and sweet, smelling of the cooling hearth, the faint bitterness of charred cedar, and the ancient, quiet dust of the rafters that have seen centuries of nights just like this one. As the world outside settles into the profound silence of the midnight hour, we leave the secret orchards and the echoing public halls behind to enter the most private of spaces. We are looking at the transition from the promise to the reality, the delicate, often wordless moments of the wedding night and the first quiet weeks of a shared lived life. Imagine the scent of fresh, green rushes strewn upon the floor, released under the weight of footsteps. The clean, sharp fragrance of linen that is dried in the summer sun, and the heavy, protective silence of a room where two people sit, perhaps for the very first time, away from the eyes of the world, as husband and wife. Part 9. The threshold of the heart and the first hearth for the medieval couple. The wedding night was not merely a personal beginning. It was a profound transition of state, a solemn ritual as significant and heavy as a coronation. Whether they were nobles in a grand chamber draped in silk and velvet, or peasants in a small timbered cottage, smelling of wood smoke and earth, the evening was governed by traditions designed to bridge the gap between two people who were, until very recently, almost strangers in spirit. There was a unique, heavy atmosphere to these moments, a mixture of profound uncertainty, a quiet, flickering hope, and the immense, invisible weight of communal and family expectations that pressed against the door from the outside. Imagine Catherine and Peter, whom we watched at the church door, as they enter their new home for the first time. The village feast has finally wound down. The music of the pipes has faded into the misty distance, and the boisterous, well-wishing cheers of their neighbors have been replaced by the rhythmic, steady chirping of crickets in the eaves. As they step over the threshold, there is a sudden, sharp realization of the silence. In a world where they were never truly aloneaways, surrounded by kin, co-workers, or curious eyes, this newfound privacy feels almost like a physical weight, a strange and wonderful burden that they must now carry together. For the first time, they are not a son and a daughter of different houses, but the king and queen of their own small, wooden realm in the medieval tradition. The marriage bed was often more than just furniture. It was a sacred site, the cornerstone of the family's future. It was frequently blessed by the village priest before the couple entered, sprinkled with holy water and incense to ward off shadows and to invite fruitfulness and peace into the home. This ritual served as a powerful reminder that their union was part of a larger, sacred order that held the entire universe together. But beneath the prayers and the formal ceremonies was the very simple, very human reality of two people who were still learning the sound of each other's breathing. Catherine moves through the small, candlelit room, her hands kept busy with the simple, grounding task of smoothing the heavy wool blankets, her movements a rhythmic way to anchor her fluttering nerves. Peter stands by the hearth, stoking the fire for the first time as the master of his own house, the crackle of the wood the only bridge across the silence between them. He is not just building a fire for warmth. He is establishing the hearth that will feed his children and light his old age. The courtship of early married life was often more significant and lasting than the courtship that preceded the vows. In the Middle Ages, love was frequently seen as a slow-growing fruit that appeared after the planting and the hard work of the season, not necessarily a seed that existed before the first furrow was turned. Their first few weeks together were a slow, methodical dance of daily discovery. They were learning the geography of one another, Not just their physical presence in the room, but the landscape of their habits, the pitch of their voices when tired, and the quiet, hidden strengths that only emerge through shared labor. It was in the way she reached for the ladle, or the way he adjusted his stride to match hers on the way to the stream, that the true map of their marriage was drawn. Imagine the sensory world of this early union as it begins to take root. It is the sound of the morning fire being lit by one while the other still sleeps in the gray dawn light. A small act of service that speaks louder than a poem. It is the smell of the first simple pottage, cooked together over their own shared flames. The steam rising toward the rafters and seasoning the wood. It is the feeling of shared, wordless purpose as they head out to the fields. Their strides beginning to match over time until they move as one. There is a deep, grounding comfort in this shared rhythm. For Peter, his sense of honor is now found in the way he ensures. The stone walls are tight and the thatch is thick against the autumn rain for Catherine. For Catherine, her strength is found in the way she turns a cold, empty house into a sanctuary of warmth, scent, and order, making a place where the soul can rest after a day of toil. The emotional reality of this time was one of quiet, steady acceptance in the slow, brick-by-brick building of trust. They might not have spoken of love in the flowery, dramatic way of the poets, but they practiced it in the way they divided a loaf of dark bread, ensuring the other had the larger share. They practiced it in the way they looked to one another for a silent decision in the market, standing as a united front against the world, and they practiced it in the way they sat together in the gathering dusk, shoulders touching, after a day of back-breaking toil. This was the steady flame of medieval marriage, not a flash of lightning that blinds and then vanishes, but a relationship forged in the crucible of mutual survival and tempered by 10,000 daily, repetitive acts of kindness, duty, and shared silence, as the weeks turned into months. The initial uncertainty of the wedding night began to fade, replaced by a profound, unspoken companionship that needed no lute songs to sustain it. They were no longer the shy young man and woman who had shared a cautious glance across a crowded harvest field. They were the architects of a brand new world. Every mended garment, every harvested row of barley, and every shared prayer whispered at the bedside was a stone in the fortress of their life together. They were discovering the most profound secret of their age, that while the world outside might be harsh, the Lord's demanding, and the winters long, the small, warm space they shared was a kingdom entirely of their own making. It was a space where two people could finally be themselves, shielded by the walls they had built together. The fire in our own hearth has nearly vanished now, leaving only the softest, most silver memory of light. The story of the medieval heart, from the knight's crimson ribbon to the peasant's secret glance, from the noble's ink-stained letter to the church's heavy vowel, leads to this final moment, the quiet, enduring power of two people standing together, hand in hand, against the vast darkness of history. The Middle Ages were a time of great walls and high towers, but the strongest, most resilient structures of all were the invisible ones built by the human heart. One quiet, faithful, and ordinary day at a time, through famine, plague, and war. These small islands of shared life were the true anchors of the world. As you drift now into a deep and peaceful sleep, let these ancient rhythms of life and love settle over you like a warm, heavy blanket. The world is quiet, the hearth is still, and you are safe in the long, gentle shadows of time. The stories have all been told, and the day is done. The fire has now become a soft, pulsing heart of embers, draped in a thin, translucent veil of silver-gray ash. The room is held in a deep, velvet stillness, the kind of quiet that feels as though the very timber of the house is settling into a dream alongside you. Outside, the world is hushed. The birds have long been silent in their nests, and the wind only speaks in a low, gentle whisper through the thick layers of the thatch. We have journeyed through the fire of youth, the cold steel of duty, and the secret, whispered paths of the forbidden. Now, we arrive at the most peaceful chapter of all, the golden, quiet afternoon of a long life shared. Imagine yourself in a small, cozy room where the wood of the benches and the table is dark and polished to a mirror-like sheen by decades of human touch. The air smells of dried apples, clean beeswax, and the lingering, grounding warmth of a hearth that hasn't gone cold in over 40 years. This is the story of companionship in the winter years, not a story of grand, sweeping gestures or loud proclamations, but of the immense, sacred beauty found in the architecture of a lifetime of shared silence. Part 10. The Mended Cloth and the Shared Silence in the Middle Ages. Reaching the autumn of one's life was seen as a quiet, hard-won victory for a couple who had weathered the seasons together, surviving the lean winters, the grueling harvests, and the many storms of life. Their relationship was no longer a thing of words or frantic, nervous energy. It had become something as sturdy, gnarled, and familiar as the ancient oak tree that stands in the center of the village square. By this time, the love they shared was not a flickering spark or a roaring blaze, but a deep, underground river, visible to the casual observer, but providing the very lifeblood for everything they were and everything they had built. Imagine Peter and Catherine again, now gray-haired and moving with a slow, deliberate grace that speaks of many years lived in rhythm. They are sitting together on a weathered wooden bench outside their cottage as the evening light turns the world into a hazy copper dream. They do not need to speak to one another. In 40 or 50 years, they have already said everything that truly needs to be said. Their communication has moved beyond the clumsiness of language and into the realm of the physical and the intuitive. Peter knows. By this slight, almost imperceptible way, Catherine tilts her head, that she is listening to the distant, melodic sound of the sheep bells coming down from the high pasture. Catherine knows, by the specific way Peter rests his calloused, trembling hand on his knee, that his old wound from a harvest many summers ago is aching in the evening damp. This is the ultimate intimacy of the Middle Ages, the ability to read the other person like a well-worn beloved prayer book, knowing every smudge on the page and every word of the liturgy by heart. Their daily routine has become a series of quiet, rhythmic rituals that provide the structure of their peace. In the morning, Peter still brings in the wood for the day, though he carries fewer logs now and pauses to catch his breath against the doorframe. Catherine still tends the pottage over the fire, though her movements are slower and more measured. There is a profound dignity in this pace. They are no longer racing against the sun to finish a task. They are moving with the sun, acknowledging the sacredness of the present moment. The work they do is no longer about building a future or expanding a legacy. It is about honoring the life they have already made. They find a deep, resonant joy in the smallest of things, the way the afternoon light hits a certain pewter bowl, the smell of fresh bread cooling on a stone, or the sight of their grandchildren playing in the dust of the lane. The sensory world of their old age is soft, muted, and incredibly rich. It is the feel of a hand, wrinkled and dry, like ancient parchment, slipping into another hand that fits perfectly within it, a hand that has held theirs through weddings, funerals, and the birth of a new generation. It is the sound of the fire crackling, a sound that has been the steady heartbeat of their house every single night of their lives together. It is the sharp, familiar taste of the first cider of the season, shared from a single wooden mug, their eyes meeting over the rim in a silent toast to another year. These moments carry a weight and a depth that youth simply cannot understand, for they are infused with the ghosts and memories of all the autumns that came before. There is a deep, unshakable emotional comfort in this final stage of life. The frantic fires of passion have long since settled into a steady, warming glow that never flickers, even in the strongest wind. They have seen each other at their absolute worst, in the grip of sickness, in the hollowed-out silence of grief, and in the bone-deep exhaustion of the lean years when the crops failed, because there are no more secrets left to keep, and no more pretenses left to maintain. There is a total, radical, and healing acceptance. They are the sole keepers of each other's history. Peter is the only person left on this earth who remembers Catherine as the young girl with the bright blue ribbon at the well, her eyes full of the morning light. Catherine is the only one who truly remembers Peter as the nervous young man who stood exactly 5 paces behind her in the churchyard, trying to sound brave for her ears. In each other's eyes, they are still those young people, their true selves preserved behind the changing masks of their aging bodies. In the quiet, blue hours before sleep, they sit by the hearth, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows of their lived history against the stone walls. They might speak in hushed tones of the friends who have long since passed on to the churchyard, or the way the village has grown and changed around them, but mostly they just exist together. Their silence is not an empty void. It is a full, rich silence, a shared meditation on the mystery of a life well lived. They are like 2 old trees whose roots have become so entangled and entwined over the decades that it is now impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins, as the moon climbs over the dark ridge, casting a silver, ethereal light over the sleeping village and the silent fields. They make their way to their bed. The blankets are heavy, smelling of lavender and the history of their home. They lie in the dark, the rhythmic, familiar breathing of the other person the most comforting and necessary sound in the world. They know that the winter of life is nearing its end, and that one day, inevitably, one will have to go on a short while without the other. But in the deep, peaceful stillness of the night, that fear is held at bay by the immense, quiet strength of their companionship. They have built a sanctuary of memory, a world made of 2, that the passing years have only made more beautiful and more solid.